On January 15th, 2023, Sarah Bennett's routine hike through Pinewood Forest took an unexpected turn. Sarah, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer, had been capturing images in these woods for over a decade. That day was particularly cold, nearly 10 degrees below freezing. "I was about 2 miles into my usual trail," Sarah later recalled. "The forest was quieter than normal. Most animals were sheltering from the cold, which made it perfect for getting those rare winter shots." Sarah had been commissioned by National Geographic to document the seasonal changes in the old-growth forest. With her camera bag slung over her shoulder and a tripod in hand, she carefully navigated the snow-covered path, occasionally stopping to photograph interesting ice formations or animal tracks. At approximately 3:15 p.m., as the winter sun began its early descent, Sarah decided to venture slightly off her planned route when she noticed some unusual tracks in the fresh snow. They looked like dog prints, but that was strange because this area prohibited pets on trails. "My first thought was maybe someone had broken the rules, or perhaps it was a coyote," Sarah explained. Following the tracks for about a quarter mile, Sarah began to hear a faint sound carried by the wind. Initially dismissing it as branches creaking in the cold, she continued forward until the sound became more distinct, a whimpering noise that was unmistakably from an animal in distress. "It was a sound that made my heart drop," Sarah said. "You know when you hear something that's just wrong, something that shouldn't be there? That's what this was." Sarah quickened her pace, her camera equipment jostling against her back. The whimpering grew louder as she pushed through a dense thicket of pine branches and emerged into a small clearing. There, tied to a large oak tree, was a German shepherd. The dog was severely emaciated, its fur matted with ice and snow. A thick rope bound it tightly to the tree, cutting into its neck where fur had worn away. A metal bowl lay overturned nearby, frozen solid. "The sight was like a punch to the gut," Sarah would later tell authorities. "This wasn't an accident or a dog that had gotten loose. Someone had deliberately brought this animal here and left it to die." The German shepherd raised its head weakly as Sarah appeared. Its eyes were clouded with pain and fear, but a small tail movement indicated it was still fighting to survive. When Sarah took a step forward, the dog bared its teeth and growled, a feeble warning from an animal too weak to defend itself properly. "I could see every rib." Based on the snow accumulation and the condition of the area around the tree, the dog had been there for at least 2 or 3 days. It was a miracle it was still alive in those temperatures. Sarah slowly knelt in the snow, maintaining a safe distance from the frightened animal. She spoke in soft, even tones, trying to convey that she meant no harm. The German shepherd watched her warily, trembling violently both from fear and the bitter cold that had settled into its bones. "Hey, buddy," Sarah said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise I'm going to get you out of here." The light was fading quickly, and Sarah knew she had limited time. The temperature would drop dangerously after sunset, and she was already feeling the cold seeping through her insulated hiking gear. She estimated she was about 2 miles from the nearest road with difficult terrain between. Sarah assessed her options quickly. She couldn't leave the dog to go get help. It might not survive another night in the freezing conditions. But approaching a scared, potentially aggressive dog posed its own dangers. And even if she could free it, getting a large, weak dog through the forest in deepening snow would be enormously challenging. Taking a slow breath, Sarah made her decision. She carefully removed her backpack and unzipped the top compartment, extracting the sandwich she'd packed for her hike. "Food is universal," she explained later. "I figured it was my best chance at building even the smallest bit of trust." Breaking off a small piece of turkey, Sarah tossed it toward the dog, intentionally landing it halfway between them. The German shepherd's nostrils flared, catching the scent of food, but it remained frozen in place, too afraid or too weak to move. Sarah settled more comfortably into the snow, prepared for a long wait. She tossed another small piece, this one landing a bit closer to the dog. Time was of the essence, but rushing would only make the situation worse. In that moment, looking at those frightened eyes, I made a promise, to myself and to that dog, that no matter what it took, we were both walking out of that forest alive. For 20 minutes, Sarah remained motionless, periodically tossing small bits of food toward the German Shepherd. Gradually, the dog's hunger overcame its fear. It stretched its neck as far as the rope would allow, straining to reach a piece of turkey that lay just beyond its reach. "That moment told me everything," Sarah said. "The dog was starving, but couldn't even reach food that was inches away. The person who left him made sure he could barely move." Sarah inched forward on her knees, moving slowly to avoid startling the animal. The dog growled, a low, warning rumble, but its eyes now focused more on the remaining food in Sarah's hand than on Sarah herself. "I'm just going to come a little closer, buddy," she murmured, maintaining a steady stream of gentle conversation. "We need to get you warm and safe." The temperature continued to drop as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Sarah's phone showed it was now 17 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. Her hiking watch beeped with a weather alert. An unexpected snow squall was moving in, with temperatures predicted to plunge below zero overnight. When Sarah was about 4 feet from the tree, she stopped. The dog had ceased growling but watched her with tense vigilance. She tossed the last piece of her sandwich just within the animal's reach. As the German Shepherd cautiously took the food, Sarah noticed its water bowl was completely frozen solid. "That was the moment I truly understood how cruel this abandonment was," Sarah recalled. Someone had actually left water, just enough to pretend they cared, knowing full well it would freeze within hours, leaving the dog to die of thirst before it even starved. Sarah reached for her water bottle, pouring some into her cupped hand and offering it to the dog. After a moment's hesitation, the German Shepherd lapped desperately at the water, confirming Sarah's suspicion that dehydration was as immediate a threat as the cold. With the dog distracted by drinking, Sarah carefully examined the rope. It was thick nautical-type rope, tightly knotted and partially frozen. The knots had been deliberately tied in a way that would tighten if the dog pulled against them, a cruel detail that spoke to the abandonment being premeditated. "I need to cut you free," Sarah said softly, reaching slowly into her pocket for her multi-tool knife. The dog tensed at the movement but was now too weak to maintain its defensive posture. Sarah showed the knife to the dog before proceeding, letting it sniff the tool. As the first snowflakes of the approaching squall began to fall, Sarah worked methodically at the rope, sawing through the frozen fibers. The cold made her fingers clumsy, and twice she had to stop to warm her hands under her armpits. Come on," she muttered, as much to herself as to the dog. The sky darkened rapidly, and Sarah switched on her headlamp to see the rope better. After what seemed like an eternity, the main restraint snapped free. The German Shepherd didn't immediately move, seemingly unaware that it was now untethered. Sarah gently touched the dog's shoulder, feeling the bones prominent beneath its matted fur. The animal flinched but didn't snap. "You're free now," Sarah told it, moving back to give the dog space, "but we need to get you out of here." The dog attempted to stand but collapsed immediately, its legs too weak from cold and disuse to support its weight. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the animal couldn't walk out on its own. "I had this moment of overwhelming panic," she later admitted. "I'm 5 feet 4 inches, maybe 130 pounds. This dog, even emaciated, was at least 70 pounds. We were miles from the trailhead, in deteriorating weather with night falling. I honestly didn't know if we were going to make it." Sarah assessed her gear quickly. She had her backpack, camera equipment, emergency thermal blanket, and limited food and water. The snow was now falling steadily, already accumulating on her shoulders and the dog's back. With determined efficiency, Sarah emptied her camera bag, removing the expensive equipment and wrapping it in her spare clothes. She lined the now empty bag with her emergency thermal blanket and positioned it next to the German Shepherd. "I had to make a choice between my livelihood and this dog's life," Sarah explained. "It wasn't even a question, really." Using gentle coaxing and the last of her trail mix as incentive, Sarah managed to help the weakened dog into the makeshift sled. The German Shepherd curled up tightly, still shivering violently but no longer showing signs of aggression. Sarah fashioned a pulling system using the shoulder strap from her camera bag and the rope she'd cut from the tree. The snow was now falling heavily, rapidly covering the trail she'd made earlier. Sarah checked her phone's GPS, marking their position and plotting the quickest route back to the forest access road. "It's going to be okay," she told the dog, securing her headlamp more firmly. "We're going home." The journey back was grueling. The improvised sled moved erratically over the uneven forest floor, occasionally catching on exposed roots or rocks hidden beneath the snow. Every few minutes, Sarah had to stop to adjust the blanket around the dog and check its condition. 40 minutes into the trek, the German Shepherd began to shiver more violently, a sign that hypothermia was advancing. Sarah removed her own coat, a high-end down parka designed for extreme conditions, and tucked it around the dog, leaving herself with only a mid-layer fleece for protection. "The cold hit me like a wall," Sarah recalled, "but I knew I was still moving, generating heat. The dog wasn't. Basic survival training teaches you to prioritize the most vulnerable." The snow squall intensified, reducing visibility to just a few feet. Sarah relied heavily on her GPS now, the trail completely obscured. Her fingers and toes began to lose sensation, and she recognized the early signs of her own hypothermia setting in. 2 hours into what should have been a 45-minute hike, Sarah's phone battery died from the extreme cold. She was now navigating by memory and instinct, pulling the increasingly unresponsive dog through snow that had deepened to mid-calf. "There was a point where I started talking out loud to myself, to the dog, to the forest. Anyone who might be listening," Sarah said. "I just kept repeating, 'Keep moving, just keep moving.'" Just as Sarah's own strength began to waver, the trees thinned, and she spotted the reflective markers of the forest access road through the curtain of snow. With renewed determination, she pulled the makeshift sled the final 100 yards to where her car was parked, now covered in several inches of fresh snow. Using the last of her energy, Sarah lifted the German Shepherd into her car's back seat, cranked the heat to maximum, and wrapped them both in the emergency space blanket from her glove compartment. I remember looking at the dashboard clock as I started the engine. It had taken us almost 3 hours to travel 2 miles. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone to look up the nearest emergency vet. As warmth slowly returned to the car, Sarah reached back to check on the dog. The German Shepherd's eyes were open, watching her with an expression that had transformed from fear to something Sarah could only describe as cautious trust. "That look was everything," Sarah said quietly. "That's when I knew, whatever happened next, I was committed to this dog's journey." With the GPS programmed to the all-night veterinary hospital 30 miles away, Sarah carefully navigated the snow-covered roads, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching back occasionally to reassure the German Shepherd that he wasn't alone anymore. The veterinary staff rushed out with a stretcher as soon as Sarah pulled into the emergency clinic parking lot. Dr. Elena Patel, the attending veterinarian, immediately assessed the situation as critical. "This dog is severely hypothermic and dehydrated," Dr. Patel said, directing her team as they transferred the German Shepherd onto the stretcher. "Get him to treatment room 1. We need warming blankets, IV fluids, and blood work stat." Sarah followed them inside, her own exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she watched the medical team work. Her hands and feet tingled painfully as circulation returned, but her focus remained entirely on the dog. "Will he make it?" she asked Dr. Patel as the veterinarian inserted an IV line. "The next 24 hours will be critical," Dr. Patel replied honestly. "He's severely malnourished, probably hasn't eaten properly in weeks. There's frostbite on his paws and ears. But he's young, maybe 3 years old, and German Shepherds are tough. He's fighting." As the medical team stabilized the dog, a technician approached Sarah with admission paperwork. The form required a name for the patient. Sarah hesitated only briefly before writing Forrest. It seemed right, Sarah explained later. The forest was where I found him, but it was also a place of strength and survival. I wanted him to carry that with him. The financial portion of the form gave Sarah momentary pause. Emergency veterinary care wasn't cheap, and the extensive treatment Forrest would need could potentially cost thousands. Sarah was a successful photographer, but not wealthy by any means. Without hesitation, she checked the box authorizing all necessary treatments and provided her credit card information. As she signed the form, the clinic manager approached her gently. "Ms. Bennett, I should inform you that cases like this with suspected abuse and abandonment are reported to animal control. They'll likely want to speak with you." Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how physically and emotionally drained she felt. "Of course, I want to file a report anyway. Someone did this deliberately." While Forrest received emergency treatment, Sarah called her neighbor to check on her own dog, a 10-year-old retriever mix named Bailey. She then settled into the clinic's waiting room, refusing to leave despite the staff's suggestion that she go home and rest. "I couldn't leave," she said simply. "He needed to see a familiar face when he woke up." 3 hours later, Dr. Patel emerged from the treatment area with cautious optimism. Forrest's body temperature had stabilized and he was responding well to fluids and nutrients. However, blood tests revealed anemia, liver issues from starvation, and signs of previous injuries that had healed poorly. Someone had this dog for a while and neglected him long before abandoning him, Dr. Patel explained, showing Sarah the x-rays that revealed a previously broken rib that had healed without treatment. "We also found an embedded collar line, meaning he wore a collar that was too tight for so long it created a permanent wound. We removed dozens of ticks, some evidence of mange. This wasn't a one-time incident of cruelty." Sarah felt a surge of anger at the unknown person who had systematically mistreated Forrest before leaving him to die. "Will there be permanent damage?" "Physically, he should recover with proper care," Dr. Patel said, "but psychologically, that's harder to predict. He's going to need significant rehabilitation, medically and behaviorally." Forrest remained at the veterinary hospital for 5 days. Sarah visited daily, sitting quietly beside his kennel, sometimes reading aloud from whatever book she was currently enjoying. Initially, Forrest would retreat to the back of his enclosure when she arrived, but by the 3rd day, he began to approach the front of the kennel, his tail giving the slightest wag of recognition. On the 6th day, Dr. Patel determined Forrest was stable enough to be discharged into home care. He'll need a specialized diet, medication for his liver, regular wound care for the frostbitten areas, and follow-up appointments. Are you prepared for this commitment? Absolutely, Sarah replied without hesitation. She had already spent the previous days preparing her home, purchasing a crate, special food, comfortable bedding, and consulting with a professional trainer who specialized in traumatized dogs. When Sarah opened her car door in the clinic parking lot, Forrest hesitated, clearly remembering their previous journey together. "It's okay," she assured him. "This time we're going home." The first night in Sarah's house was challenging. Forrest paced anxiously, startling at every unfamiliar sound. He refused to enter the comfortable dog bed Sarah had prepared, instead wedging himself into a corner of the kitchen where he could watch all entry points to the room. Sarah sat on the floor a few feet away, giving him space while maintaining a calm presence. "You're safe now," she told him quietly. "No one's going to hurt you again." Around midnight, Sarah dozed off against the refrigerator. She awoke at dawn to find Forrest had moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body nearby. It was the first of many small victories. The following weeks established a careful routine. Sarah worked from home, adjusting her photography editing schedule to accommodate Forrest's care. Each day brought new challenges and tiny breakthroughs. Forrest initially growled at Sarah's friend Michael when he visited, backing away with raised hackles. "Male figures trigger him," noted Kira Williams, the behavioral specialist who began weekly sessions at Sarah's home. "That's common in abuse cases, will work on positive associations. The physical rehabilitation progressed more quickly than the emotional. Forrest's coat began to fill in, the dull fur gradually regaining a healthy shine. His ribs became less prominent as he gained weight on his specialized diet. The frostbitten areas on his ears healed, leaving only slight scarring. "He's like a different dog physically," Dr. Patel commented during a 1-month checkup. "You've done amazing work with him." But psychological scars ran deeper. Forrest panicked during thunderstorms, clawing frantically at doors. He reacted with terror to certain triggers: men wearing hats, the sight of rope or chains, the sound of raised voices. Nightmares woke him several times weekly, his legs churning as if running, whimpering sounds escaping his throat. Sarah began sleeping on the couch, where Forrest could see her from his preferred corner. During nightmares, she would speak softly, not touching him until he was fully awake and recognized her. "Recovery isn't linear," Kira reminded Sarah during particularly difficult weeks. "There will be setbacks. The important thing is that he's in a consistent environment with clear boundaries and unconditional safety." 3 months after the rescue, Sarah attempted to take Forrest on his first walk in the neighborhood.